Wait, 30 seconds.
Thanks for telling us before the meeting was fully done. That would have been really good.
$15 seconds. 5, 4, 3.
Instructions for providing public comment are posted on the General Assembly's website. Under this task force meeting notice, an agenda will be provided during the public comment portion of this meeting. Please note any votes will be taken by a roll call. We're going to take attendance right now. Representative Matthews present. Senator Walsh.
Senator Walsh is present.
Representative Smith.
Representative Smith present.
Senator Hocker.
Present.
Secretary Majeski.
Present.
Brenda Wise from OMB.
Present.
The Controller General, Ruth Ann Jones.
Present.
Representative Heffernan, our bond bill co-chair.
Present.
And Senator Poore, our Senate co-chair of the bond bill.
Present.
Okay, we're going to have approval of the minutes from the previous meeting, which was on October 20th. I know we've all had a chance to review them. Could I have a motion to approve the previous meeting's minutes?
Motion to approve the minutes, Representative Smith.
Second, Senator Walsh.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Okay, today's agenda is a discussion about some of the issues around the history of CTF, different funding mechanisms, and some modeling of different scenarios that DelDOT has put together for us. We're gonna go to some of the agencies. We're gonna go to the Controller General first, if that's fine. Once we do some introductions from the legislators. For the public out there listening, we're trying to get all the different information around the history of this issue and problem, talked about during these meetings, and as we prepare the final report, all the different solutions, and we want that document to be a map to how we solve this long-standing issue. Do any legislators want to make a comment briefly before we start? Representative Heffernan, did you want to say something earlier when we?
Sure. I was just going to say that I'm happy to join this task force. I know that both Senator Poore and I, as co-chairs of the bond bill, know that there's, that the CTF funds that each representative and senator are awarded is never enough to do all the work that we need in our districts. And so we're looking at this task force to help us come up with some creative solutions. So thank you, Sean.
You're welcome. And with that, we'll go to the Controller General. And if the staff could ensure if any of the presenters have visuals that they can be co-host to share screens as needed, that would be appreciated. Oh, and then one last thing, I intend to take questions after each section. So we'll stop after the Controller General, take questions specific to her content and with the other presenters also.
All right. Hello, everyone. Can you see the screen? Subdivision, Streets, and Community Transportation Fund? Okay, perfect. So hello, everyone. I'm Ruth Ann Jones, Controller General. Representative Matthews asked us to do a little bit of a history and explanation of how CTF is used. And so we can jump right in with sort of a general timeline, which DelDOT shared at the initial meeting. So as they noted in the first task force meeting, prior to the 1980s, suburban streets were incorporated into DelDOT's annual paving program, which to this day, the paving and rehab program still has a long appendix at the end of each bond bill. However, because the subdivision streets had significantly lower traffic volumes, they didn't rank high enough often to get paving done. And so in order to try and address that a little more effectively, the Bond Bill Committee created the Suburban Streets Program in the early 80s and added an annual funding allocation specifically for the Suburban Streets Program in the Bond Bill. The Bond Committee was still responsible for the rules governing the program, but the actual amounts dedicated to suburban streets varied each year as in the streets to be addressed. There was a full listing included at the end of the bond bill. So if you look at the old 80s bond bills, there was still a full appendix at the end that showed the streets that were going to be paved and the amounts that were going to be dedicated to those paving lists, but the lists themselves were lumped together with suburban streets, paving, and rehabilitation roads. So it was hard to fully decipher which was just suburban streets. But again, that was the hope was that these suburban streets would start to be more effectively addressed. Then in fiscal year 2002, the Bond Committee restructured the Suburban Streets Program altogether and replaced it with the Community Transportation Fund, which is still in place today. They did that with $20,100,000 and any funds that were remaining from the original Subdivision Streets Program. The legislature's intention for this was to have DelDOT again rate the roads with the same criteria as the paving and rehab program, so that legislators could base funding of streets on the poorest rating first, but it still gave legislators discretion to essentially fund whatever they wanted. So this still let the roads have a rating system, but legislators were not totally bound to that rating system as to what they paid for with their CTF. Then in 2019, with many subdivision streets still remaining in poor condition, the Bond Committee created the CTF Pilot Paving Program, which dedicated $5 million to DelDOT to accelerate the improvement of these streets based solely on ratings, regardless of legislative district. And so to go more into a history of the CTF program's funding, as mentioned in FY 2002, when it was started, it had $20 million, $100,000. That level has remained fairly consistent. However, there have been years due to budget constraints where that amount was much lower. So for example, in fiscal year 2011, CTF was only $11,475,000, and that was again split between all 62 legislators. In FY 18, again, additional budget constraints were in place then, and so that amount was a little lower. For the last 4 years, however, it's been fairly consistent at the $22 million level, but what has been added is that new CTF pilot program. So the $5 million in FY 19, 20, and 21, and then in 22, the pilot was increased from 5 to 10 million plus an additional $20 million in one-time funding specifically to address those streets with the poorest ratings. So CTF is divided equally amongst the 62 legislators with an additional carve-out amount for the Bond Bill Committee chairs who often use that additional funding in support of other legislators' projects. And I'm sure as Representative Heffernan and Senator Poore can attest to, there are many times when there are drainage projects throughout legislative districts that need funding. And so that gives them an additional resource to pull from. In the current year, every legislator receives a CTF allocation of $325,000. The Bond Bill Committee is responsible for Rule 12, which is the rule that governs the Community Transportation Fund program altogether. So if there is something that is not in Rule 12 that a legislator would like to pay for with CTF, the only way that it is made allowable is through legislation. And so typically that legislation is through Bond Bill epilogue language. So many times if there is something, a fire company vehicle or some other purpose that's not currently listed in Rule 12, there will be epilogue added in the bond bill to allow CTF to be used for that purpose. Rule 12 currently has over 36 allowable uses of funding. And so This was established again back in 2002 and has been updated and added to through the years. So many of the things that are allowable, again, paving public streets, crack sealing, traffic signals, fences, curb and gutter improvements, etc. Landscaping, bikeways, transit shelters, the 5310 bus program. Again, all typically programs that have a very obvious transportation component to them. And then toward the end of the list, these are the most recently added allowable uses, including all-terrain vehicles, including bicycle safety program funds, storm cleanup, landscaping and right-of-ways, concrete aprons at bay entrances and exits at fire stations, and then command, fire service, and traffic safety vehicles for fire companies. Section B of Rule 12 specifically governs DELDOT's role in projects performed by entities other than DELDOT. So if there's a third party in there, the Rule 12 specifically requires DELDOT matches those cost estimates with funds available. DELDOT enters agreements with that entity. The contractual agreements must be approved by the Secretary of Transportation. The projects are tracked by DELDOT. DELDOT will pay 10% of the project cost prior to construction for planning, design, etc. The remaining funds are paid using specific methods of payment, and then the DELDOT auditors perform risk assessments annually. This is all outlined in Section B of Rule 12. And then in Section C, this provides information for estimate, expiration, and cost adjustment. And this section is updated every year to update fiscal years and allows for essentially inflationary increases that need to be added to estimates that are starting to age. Any changes to Rule 12 have to be made through the Bond Bill Committee because obviously Rule 12 is one of their rules. And so every year we review what is in Rule 12 and if updates need to be made. And so what often happens is my office starts to track if there have been a significant number of legislative requests for a specific use that is not currently in Rule 12, we will schedule a meeting with DELDOT and say, here's something that we see a lot of legislative interest in. We would like to update Rule 12 so that we don't have to do epilogue in order for them to be allowed to use this. So that is often how Rule 12 ends up being updated. Oh, sorry, I meant to go back. But again, since its inception, Rule 12 has been updated, I think, over 35 times since 2002. But keep in mind, over half of those 35 times are just the fiscal year updates and the normal date changes that occur. There have been instances where Rule 12 has been amended to remove a use. So I believe in one year there was something specific to the 2009 fiscal year. So those little adjustments would be included in the 35 times that it has been updated since inception. So that is sort of a quick synopsis of CTF and how those streets were funded previously, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Ruth Ann. I have a question and then also just a request. Could you look at, I was kind of struck by that chart. I thought it was very helpful. You presented with the CTF over the years. Could you, like, maybe for our next meeting, have a chart that looks at budget growth in the budget at large, maybe the operating budget, the capital budget, and then compare it to the growth of the program in CTF? And, I want to kind of compare inflation, cost increases, et cetera. So we can look at in that final report what CTF the amount might look like today in 2021 had we had an amount similar to what we had in 2002, which at that point, notwithstanding the great work of the pilot, which has really been super successful, it looks like the base level of CTF has been pretty close to 20 million for about 20 years. And then just one question for me, and then we can take questions from any of the other task force members. That was some great history on the different programs and how we ended up where we are. I appreciate that. With the subdivision street program, what was there an equal amount of funding per district or roads or how'd that work? Or was it just request I have a need to put it in, it gets done? Or how did that long, I assume a long list of roads get assembled, and what do they look like?
So that's a great question. So it might be easiest if I just show you one of the old bond bills here. So let's see if we can do this. So this is an example of what it looked like back in 1983. So there was a specific road listing and then an amount next to it. But again, it was combined with the paving, rehab, and suburban streets program. So it's difficult to say which was allocated through suburban streets and which was allocated through paving and rehab. But as to the amounts per legislator, I believe it was still fairly everybody gets the same amount, and you can use it for these specific streets. There were definitely some years in looking back through the 80s where a legislator must not have used his total amount allocated. And so you would see something that said Representative District 6 miscellaneous projects, and that would say maybe $5,000. So it's a little difficult to track. DelDOT may have some better understanding of what was going on back then, but that it was not as easy as saying, here's how much amount was allocated per representative back then.
Thank you. Are there any other questions from task force members?
Representative Heffernan has her hand raised.
Okay. Representative Heffernan?
I just wanted to elaborate a little, and thank you, Ruth Ann. That was great summary that you presented. When the Rule 12 changes are made, it's sometimes they are due for a certain project that a legislator has, like to put funding, let's say for a playground or something like that, and they want to use their funds for a certain project. But we have moved in the past years to look at, like Ruth Ann said, that things that changes that we need made to the actual Rule 12, and one that it used to be you could only buy a speed radar sign and not fix a speed radar sign. So that had been added, even though now that's a little different. But it's really a way that Rule 12 can give our reps and senators the flexibility to spend the money to help their district.
And I agree. And I think Rule 12 gives really important tools to legislators to solve local needs. So there's definitely no issue with that. And I think as for our discussion about the funding needed, I think DelDOT has a stat, which we'll probably talk about, like how much of the funding is going to roads in general, just as we look at what the funding levels may need to be. And all those projects and drainage and all are very meritorious in all their districts. So any other questions from task force members before we go to OMB? I see Representative Smith has his hand.
Not a question, just more of a statement. I would say more of the roads in my area, and a lot of the feedback I get, which is very logical, is, hey, you pave this section of road between, let's just say, House 100 and House 136. You guys would save a bunch of money if you just came in and did it versus doing it in sections. So I think one thing I'd like to look at is if we had an amount to go in and do cost sharing with DelDOT or whoever, the bond bill, whoever, in those types of scenarios, because you have a lot of these neighborhoods that are either like a big loop or these big, huge subdivisions with main streets that we can't even afford to do with our annual allocation. So something to consider as we move forward, because I know that I would say for probably all of us, we're in those situations with several streets each fiscal year.
I think that's a great point, Representative Smith. And I know DelDOT this year put a lot of work into letting legislators look at roads nearby the pilot location that might be near the same condition, but not going to be on the list this year, and adding them on. I think to your point, though, maybe the pilot in the future might have to evolve to having another category for, are there roads nearby? Like maybe there should be, there's like, I think 4 criteria how they rate the roads. And maybe one of them should be, is this in between two equally, like maybe it's not that bad, but it's in between two really bad sections, and that maybe could go into the rating so that the whole thing is done at once.
Yeah,
Capture what you're talking about?
it does, because I think part of it is too, you hope it's on the pilot program next year potentially, but it still may not be. But it might be the following year, the year after that. So you're just basically bumping it up for efficiency and cost effectiveness.
Correct. Okay, are there any other questions or comments before we move on to OMB? Okay, seeing none, we asked OMB to just do a deep dive into the funding issues around infrastructure. Bonding and financing is kind of their world. So I believe Brenda's going to present some content about that. So thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Brenda Wise, the Director of Policy and Communications at OMB. Alexa, if you could share a presentation, please.
Yes, I'm just starting it up. If you just give me 1 second. Thank you.
Thank you. So we do have a brief presentation today. There were just a few task force requests for us, and so I'll just briefly provide that information.
I'm so sorry. For some reason, my laptop is not letting me access and share the PowerPoint. I can send it to Mike Sheridan and maybe he can take over. Does that work for you?
Yeah, that's fine.
All right, Mike, does that work for you too?
Yeah.
All right. It's sent, so it should be working now for you.
I can also just go through the presentation if it's not coming up for some technical reasons.
Mike, do you want to 30 more seconds or how's it going? Oh, here we go. Good, perfect.
Thank you. All right, so next slide, please. So we were tasked with looking into how local roads are funded in other jurisdictions. So we reached out to NASPO and we have some information to share there. We'll also talk briefly about the CTF model in Delaware and economies of scale. Next slide. Are we able to move to the next slide? All right, well, I will just continue. So we looked into, Michigan was one of the states that we looked into. So the Road Commission for Oakland County, Michigan uses a special assessment district paving process for subdivision street resurfacing. So basically property owners submit their requests to the commission and circulate petitions. The commission then reviews the requests, receives bids, and finalizes construction costs. At that point, the commission does a board review and votes on whether or not to proceed with the project. If it's approved, then construction takes place, and then property owners pay off that assessment over 10 years. We also looked into Colorado. So the Boulder County has a comprehensive plan that stipulates how funding is prioritized. And basically, it states that for major repairs, they should be prioritized for the county's arterial and collector roadways, and that funding for major repairs for the local access roadways, which is also known as their subdivision roads, should be the responsibility of those who are served by the road. So in 2018, the average household in Boulder County paid $176 per year to the county for transportation services. The transportation department spends $1 million annually maintaining paved roads for subdivisions. And then Boulder County also receives funding from the state gas tax, vehicle registration fees, county sales tax, and the county's general fund. We also looked into Indiana. So Indiana's Department of Transportation has a community crossings program, which is a part of the governor's Next Level Roads initiative. Southern Indiana municipalities and counties receive community crossing funding, and there is a match requirement. So the larger populated areas are required to match 50%, and smaller communities are required to match 25% of state funds. Also in Indiana, they are in the process of considering how they're going to utilize ARP plans. So they're looking at ARP grants to use $4 million to help the county engineering department do an additional 15 to 20 miles of paving in subdivisions. I do have links to these articles and resources. So if you would like more information on that, we can provide it. The next slide would have basically described the Delaware CTF model. So over the last 3 years, the General Assembly has appropriated $5 million each fiscal year to CTF to be used by DelDOT as a part of our pilot program. Oh, there it is. I guess you can go to the next slide then. Thank you. So over the last 2 years, the General Assembly has appropriated $5 million each fiscal year to CTF. HCR 4 requested a report from DelDOT in February 2021 to the General Assembly, which basically indicated that there are 281 miles of subdivision streets in poor condition and 139 miles in very poor condition. The reported estimated total cost is $202 million to bring very poor and poor subdivision streets to good condition, and an annual $20 million to maintain all subdivision streets. A 2011 state task force report stated that $32 million would be needed annually to maintain Delaware subdivision streets. And in fiscal year 2022, SB 200, the bond bill, appropriated $20 million in funding to DelDOT from the general fund. As far as economies of scale, this concept was discussed with DelDOT on December 1st. We discussed the idea that legislators were looking into bundling locations and or extending locations to get greater sections paved under one project. DelDOT indicated if there were any cost savings, it would be very little. And of course, OMB defers to DelDOT's assessment. And that is the brief presentation that we have based off of the tasks that were requested. So myself and Michael McConnell are available for any questions. Thank you.
Before we take questions, can we go back to the slide just so everyone can see with the different states that you went into detail about? Maybe we can just leave it up while we take questions. That was the one that most of us didn't have a chance to see as much.
Mm-hmm. That would be number 3.
So I can start and we'll take other questions. I'm not sure if I like any of those models. They're very interesting and it definitely makes me appreciate CTF more. DelDOT probably doesn't hear me say that often, but is this something just in your research indicative? I know DelDOT is in a very unique position of having way more local roads than other states in general. I don't know if you had any research about like, are most other places doing things like this with assessments and local districts as compared to what we have a lot of more state involvement?
Yes, and I think you hit the nail on the head. Delaware is unique in the fact that DelDOT does have ownership over majority of roads, where in most other jurisdictions, that's not the case. So when we did this deep dive, and Michael, feel free to jump in, but when we did this deep dive, this is basically the kind of information we were able to find. We didn't find anything that is similar to the way Delaware is currently operating.
Secretary Majewski was not alone. Do you want to say something, Secretary?
No, Brenda is exactly right in that we are unique in that 90% of the roads are owned and maintained by us. And every other state in the nation, you've got either a county or a township that is maintaining these local roads with very, very little state support that will come from the state DOT. So that's the uniqueness of our state, in that all of our roads we're responsible for all of them. And so that's where it comes down to prioritizing and making sure that the local roads can still get the attention that they need without having to compete with all the other 3-digit main roads that we have.
So it sounds like from a pessimistic view, Delaware, it's a problem that we're like that, but optimistically, the solution is able to be fixed from our end. And I definitely trust, I'm actually in my district dealing with a nearby township in Pennsylvania where the road is half in PA, half in Delaware. And they have a person who's the road master. That's his job title. And he's only in the office 2 days a week. So it's hard to get a hold of him. But anyway, we don't have that problem with DelDOT. So were there any questions or comments from task force members? Seeing none, I thank OMB for that, and please share that with the group afterwards in the email chain. And then we're going to go to DelDOT, who spent some time modeling out different scenarios and trying to figure out timeframes and how we can get to the goal that we all share. So,
Sean, it's all you.
All right. I'm going to try and share my screen. All right. So just wanted to run through a few slides. We start every presentation with our mission to provide excellence in transportation for every trip, every mode, every dollar, and every one. Just wanted to highlight some of the slides that we went over last time, just to bring them back kind of to the forefront of everyone's mind. So first off, and you saw a slide similar to this from the CG's office. So when you look at fiscal years 16 through 22, you can see the allocation per legislator for CTF, as well as the drainage funds and the total for CTF. What I'd like to highlight is if you add up that CTF per legislator column over these 7 fiscal years, you're at about $132 million. And then when you look at the subdivision streets and their rankings as of 2019, you can see that about 27% of subdivision streets are in very poor or poor condition. So that's an important kind of data point. And I would like to highlight that at the end of this month, we will have the 2021 subdivision street condition ratings available. So we will update all of our charts then. You heard a little bit about Rule 12, and we were asked to take a look at the data and see how much is being spent on paving versus other things. It's around 60%. So if you take that, the last 7 years of data, almost $80 million has been spent on paving of the subdivision streets, which averages out to a little over $11 million a year. When you add on that in 2019, we started doing the pilot paving program. That takes us to about $16 million per year being spent on subdivision streets. And then when you bump up what is being done this year, we're at $41 million. With that one-time $20 million infusion, plus bumping the pilot paving up to $10 million. So with the pilot paving program, for the $5 million from 19 through 2021, you can see how much mileage we were able to do, just about 20 miles of road. With the $30 million for 2022, we're anticipating about 47 miles of road that will get repaved. I think one of the important kind of highlights for this is super happy to get the infusion of money to be able to address these streets, but it is going to take time to actually get all of them paved. So our team has packaged 6 separate contracts to be advertised shortly to spend this $30 million to do the paving. And we estimate that it's going to take a little over a year and a half to be able to complete all 207 locations. So obviously some of them will get done much sooner than others. And I think the really important piece to highlight here is in neighborhoods that have curbs, we have potentially to replace curbs, we have to do curb ramps, there may be drainage improvements. So there are a lot of things that factor into, we're not just going in and just paving. because just paving is pretty easy to do. But when you have to do all of those other things, about half of the time we're spending on doing all of that concrete drainage work, and then the other half we're doing on the paving. So we just want to kind of level set that with the $30 million, it'll take all of next year and part of the following year to actually see all of those locations get paved. This was the data point from the HCR4 report, just refreshing you that we had 139 miles of very poor and 281 of poor. Obviously, we're ticking some of those miles off as we've been working on the pilot program over the last couple of years. And you saw that it was about $202 million that we needed. So just want to show you a couple of interesting data points. We went all the way back to 2004 to look at the condition of suburban streets. This is focusing on the poor numbers. So in 2004, we had a little under 200 miles of poor at that time, and actually even through 2019, we really just called it poor. We didn't differentiate between poor and very poor. So basically anything below that 50 overall pavement condition rating. And it has jumped basically to more than double. So now we're over 400, probably about 425 miles of poor, total when you look at that. So you can see the transition. Now, a couple of points to highlight because you don't see every year on the bottom. So in 2009, we actually changed from a manual rating system to a semi-automated rating condition process. And so that year we had a little bit of a quirk in our numbers. And then in 2015, again, we transitioned to fully automated. So we actually have vehicles that have machines on them that can pick up, the cracking, the rutting, all of those different criteria that we use to rate the overall pavement. But you can see how much the poor has changed in just a short period of time. And this is that same data from a percentage standpoint. So we were at around 15% as being poor, and now we're at 27%. And this final chart just shows, so good is in blue, fair is in orange, and the gray is poor. So you can see how those numbers have changed over time with the various amounts of funding that we've had. So we did take some time to run just a couple of models. We ran basically a $10 million scenario and a $20 million scenario. And that's absent CTF. So that's just if we put $10 million, whether it came from CTF or pilot paving or what have you, $10 million and or $20 million and what it did. The $10 million, you basically still see the ratings declining over time. The 20 million, you see a less of a decline. And so we know that we need to be over 20 million. And Brenda referenced the 2011 report that was done that had a $32 million kind of number on it for what you needed for subdivision street paving to kind of mimic, I would say, the pavement rehabilitation program. I think it's important to note, and we talked about it last time, the paving program's goal is not to have 0% in poor. So it's really important. And so as we look forward to doing more modeling, it would be helpful either for us to do just straight numbers so we can model 30 million, 40 million, et cetera. But more importantly, I think we need to come up with some percentages that, we're comfortable that X percent is, good, fair, poor, and that will give you the true number. And that's how we do the paving program. So we basically say we want 85% of the roads to be in good or fair condition. The state maintains 3-digit road numbers, as we call them. And so we really need to probably get to somewhere like that so we can say, here's the cost to do that. And then is that cost too great? And if it is, then we basically need to change our metrics. So we're happy to do some more modeling. It does take some efforts. The model ran for, I think, 2 days straight to crank out some numbers. So happy to do more of that, but I think it would be helpful to understand what the ultimate goal is, and our system can then handle that and turn out whether it be a dollar figure, or we can take a dollar figure and tell you what the percentages will be in the long term. That's all I've got.
Thank you, Shante. So 85% is your metric for paving rehab main roads? Okay. And can you just refresh us, what was the percentages in the subdivision at the moment?
Yep.
How many are poor?
Yep. So right now we're at about 27.2% that are poor and very poor. And if you add together the good and fair, we're at 72.8.
I definitely appreciate all your guys' work on this and look forward to some more modeling. I think trying to figure out how to get that 72% closer to 85 or whatever that number is. I definitely, I understand everything you're saying about getting the 30 million from last year on the street and the contracting timeline and delays and labor. But going forward, hopefully we can stay, I would like to stay near there, but then figure out, the goal of this report is what as policymakers, when we're voting on this, do we need to do to get to that metric? So definitely after the meeting, if you could meet with the co-chair and I and talk more about some of the modeling scenarios and some things that would be helpful, that would be great. I see Representative Heffernan's hand is up.
Hi, I had a couple things. One is we did decide as a bond bill committee to increase the pilot to 10 million, not only this year, but when we, as hopefully as we can afford it to do it in future years at the 10 million too. As someone who has a lot of roads in my district, one of them rep with one of the most, and lots of poor roads, I think it's really good that we're looking at this. Now, one thing, this is only on the paving, but we also have, does this include, it includes like curbing that has to help with drainage, but it doesn't help other drainage problems that we also have, right?
That's correct.
Okay.
Senator Walsh.
Thank you. And thank you, Del Dot, Shante, Nicole for the presentation, along with Brenda and Ruth Ann, of course, today. So I know we tasked you, we gave you several different scenarios, options moving forward. Did you get a chance to review them? Is there any thoughts moving forward with a dozen or so ideas that we had given you that we can either possibly move forward with or cross off the list, or any thoughts on those scenarios that we had presented with the that was attached to the meeting minutes?
Sure. So Representative Matthews and I had a quick chat about them. So what we really need from all of you is, do you want me to model specific dollar amounts, or do you want me to model performance metrics? Modeling, I think one of the things was, CTF as is. So as I mentioned, around 60% of CTF funds go to paving. But that could change. It could go up, it could go down. So I really need to model an actual dollar figure to give you here's what the good, fair, poor would look like. So I think if we can get to some different specific numbers outside of whether it's CTF or not, and just, hey, if we spent X number in paving, what are we going to get? If we did that for 5 years, what are the numbers going to look like? We can definitely do that for you.
And that would be great. That would be great, because the ultimate goal is to try to clean up that 27.2% of the roads, right? That very poor and poor rated roads. That's all that we do. That's what we're doing also, along with you. But to clean that up, what does that look like to have to clean that up? And every 2 years, seems like we're always going backwards. I know in several districts, and I have I think I'm number 2 on the roads. I'm only able to pave maybe 2 or 3 roads out of hundreds of roads in the district. So I'm just curious. Yeah, go ahead.
If we only do the 27.2 and get those all up to good, everything that's in fair is going to flip down to poor. So that's why our metric, when we look at 3-digit roads, is not to have 0 poor, because you're going to spend an exorbitant amount of money to have 0 poor at all points in time. So that's why we need to, I think the metric and saying, and I know that it's hard to say it's okay that some roads are poor. I think eventually they'll get done as other roads flip. But if we just focus on the 27.2%, we're going to be the same place we are in a few years, because the fair roads wouldn't have had any attention and would dip down. And so that's the balance of rehabbing and reconstructing some roads, but also doing that preventative maintenance on other roads, and it's really a combination of those two to get you to whether you choose 85% or whatever percentage of good and fair. That we have to look at it holistically, because otherwise we're going to be in the same scenario down the road.
And I guess one of the other things I saw, there was 207 miles or 207 locations that were paving with that new money?
207 locations, 47 miles for the 30 million.
47 miles. And you said that would take a year and a half. In your terms, is that a good scenario, or is there a reason why it's taken so long? Do we not have the contractors in place to do that work, or why should that be done faster in your determination? How do you feel about that time frame as far as that?
So I think part of it is that we're letting 6 different contracts, but when you look at that amount of mileage, both from just paving, but also any curb and drainage work, it all adds up together. So we're not working concurrently. Let's just say each contract has, I don't know, 30 miles on it, or 30 locations, let's say. You're not doing all 30 locations at one time. So part of it is there's a sequence to, you've got your concrete crew, they're going to go through and, work on all the locations. And then as they get completed, they're going to come in and pave. And so it just takes a while to kind of get through that process.
Yeah. And I did see, that was my first thought. It looked like we're moving in the right direction. I saw a steep increase in the amount of miles due to the money we put in there, right? This year up to 47 miles, which is a good thing. As soon as I saw that was, light bulb went off, right? That was the first thing that attracted my attention where I saw that. So, that we're moving in the right direction, but we're not getting there fast enough, I guess. So, but,
right. So if you look at the 5 million in 2019, that got us a little under 9 miles. And so if you multiply the 5 by 6, you get to the 30. And if you multiply the 9 by 6, you get to close to 50 or whatever. So it's in range of what we've been doing. So yes, we've scaled it up. We're getting more because we're putting more money in, not necessarily because of great economies of scale.
Right. And if I could just add that when we started, we were tackling the very poor out there. And so the cost of reconstruction is a lot higher. So you're not able to do all the miles that you want to do because the cost per mile is so much more expensive when you're doing a full reconstruction. So as we start tackling those very poor and move to the just poor, the cost gets a little bit less. So it's not hopefully a full reconstruction, that it's just more of a rehabilitation of the road.
That's a good point. I would think driving that cost would be like the milling and paving is the same. I would think no matter if it's poor or good, it's the concrete, it's the curbing, right? Correct. Those issues that drive that cost. Yep.
Correct.
Good point.
One cool question for Delda, then we'll go to Representative Heffernan. I don't know if you want to wait till after those contracts are awarded, but would it be possible for you to help us convene a meeting of the contracting community to look at like we did a big investment in this world of paving with the infusion, and if they're scaling up, I assume they have to scale up from a workforce perspective, training perspective to meet this need. How do we work with them to hopefully continue funding at that level? But if I was them, I probably wouldn't scale up permanently if I didn't know there was a long-term plan and vision. So with our report, I guess I want to engage them with our recommendations. How do we show them here is the metrics we're using, where we're going, and the funding in general we want to do. So could you help us work with the contracting community to kind of figure out what their concerns and needs and how we can collaborate with them on that?
Happy to set something up.
Thank you. Representative Heffernan?
I have 2 things. First is I had a road that this was a couple years ago when it was on the rating list of 1.45, and I thought that might be somehow the distance, but no, that was the actual rating. So, roads that are that bad really do take a lot more money to fix. But the other thing is that some of this whole analysis doesn't take into account how the costs, at least right now with supply chain, have dramatically increased. So, we're not really, I mean, now for the same cost, we're able to do less mileage because of the increases, at least that we see right now. And so I wondered if you could address that, well, Shantae or Nicole.
Sure. So we're keeping an active eye on what's going on. We haven't seen significant increases in asphalt, for instance. We've definitely seen some in drainage, in terms of plastic pipe, striping. There are certain things in steel. So there's certain items that we have seen significant increases on. We haven't seen them across the board just yet. But to your point, it's also hard to project. You know, we said it's $202 million to address the poor and very poor. That was based on, you know, February 2021 numbers. It could increase over time. It likely will. So being able to kind of have that inflation factor in there is really important.
And then you're welcome. Shantae, could you just, Senator Walsh asked about dollar amounts versus percentages and their future modeling you're working on. From your guys' perspective, what would be best practice? Like, would it be better to look at like paving rehab 85% as a goal? Or what do you think is the best path forward as we look to the future meetings?
So I think if we can come up with a performance metric, that's a really good way to go about it, because then we're not coming up with kind of a random dollar value where if we're saying, hey, we want, you know, and you can even have a performance metric that says we don't want any more than 10% as poor or very poor. We may start somewhere like that. But I think having a performance metric is a better way to do it, just in my opinion, having done a lot of performance management stuff over the years.
So a performance metric versus just a dollar amount. Okay, we'll definitely talk more about that. Are there any questions or comments from task force members? Okay, we will, sorry, that's my dog there. We will.
Rep Matthews,
Another question.
You can go.
Oh, thank you. I'm sorry to be asking all the questions. This question is about whether two things. One is, can we use the federal infrastructure money for subdivision roads? And then the second, have we ever gotten any county like input or money into the work in the different counties? So first federal infrastructure, then county.
So Representative, with the bipartisan infrastructure bill and even the federal allocation that we receive already from federal highways, our local roads are not eligible for federal funding. So they have to be funded through our state revenue sources. As far as county participation, not that I am aware of, as far as the counties helping to fund any rehabilitation of roads, that none that I'm aware of. Shantae's shaking her head as well.
Should we ask them?
I think everything's on the table, right?
I do think, and I definitely, what you're saying is accurate, Secretary Majewski. It is interesting how many federal requirements we're required to meet on these projects, yet they don't give us any money. Just to count, like a lot of the money is on ADA requirements, yet we're getting very little funding there. So, well, thanks everyone. We're going to wrap up here. We will send out some information about future meetings and topics, and everyone have a good day. I apologize for my dog barking at the neighbor here.
Representative, I think you've got to do public comment.
Yeah, we have to do public comment. Or at least give the opportunity.
Staff, can we go to public comment, please?
If you would like to provide public comment, please utilize the raise hand function or press *9 if you're on your phone. I'm just going to repeat it one more time. If you would like to provide public comment, please utilize the raise hand function or press *9. All right, well, seeing that there are no hands raised, that concludes public comment. Rep Matthews, back to you.
Motion to adjourn?
Second.
And then I believe the DTI support tech, do we need to do anything before signing off?
we should make sure first that all the, we just made a motion in a second, Alexa, to adjourn. All those in favor should signify by saying aye.
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 Thank you.